All right, ladies and gents, welcome to this Introduction to United States Government Part 3. I am Ms. Blank, and in this presentation, we're going to be giving a very brief overview, a basic description of the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution of the United States. So let me tell you a little bit about the Constitution generally. First, it was not the first form of government in the United States. The first form of government was actually the Articles of Confederation. It was not easily adopted, and another term for that would be ratified or ratification. People like to look at the founding, hindsight's always 20/20. So they view the founding as this like flowery, happy, good times, very friendly kind of endeavor. No, it could not have been more in battle. There was an intense debate that was happening. People were getting upset and yelling and getting bent out of shape. But at the end of the day, despite how strongly each founder felt about their individual position, our founding fathers found a way to come together and bargain and compromise to create the system of government that we see before us today. Now, it's important that you understand the historical timeline in order to understand the Constitution. If you don't recognize that the Articles came first, you won't actually grasp the ingenuity of the Constitution. You have to see our mistakes before you can understand why the Constitution is so successful. And something that you need to keep in mind is that the United States system of government, a federal system, was a brand new form of government. Alexis de Tocqueville, a French historian and author, called the United States a great experiment for the world. And that is, in fact, what we are, and the experiment continues to this day. So, the Articles of Confederation were the first form of government. Now, you need to remember back to the Revolutionary War and how and why we rebelled against Great Britain. We were very concerned about a tyrannical monarch, a tyrannical executive. So, when we created the Articles, we created this system of government with that in mind. So these were in effect from 1781 to 1787. You can see the dates up in the top right hand corner. Key characteristics: it was one branch, which was a legislative branch, was Congress. States had the ability to ignore national directives. The articles, the national government could not levy taxes. It could not raise or maintain an army. It could not coin money. It could not pay the war debt. It could not protect the nation from foreign powers, and it could not enforce its own laws. Even if by some miracle all the states would agree to one law, the state representatives in the Congress of the Articles, if you could get everybody to even pass a law, which was almost impossible, you couldn't enforce it. So that it was a major problem. So I want you to walk into the ratification idea with this in mind. So once we determined that the articles were not working, we then had to come up with a new system of government. And what came out of the Constitutional Convention was the Constitution. And you had two sides. You had the Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists. So let's talk about the Federalists first. These were people who were in favor of ratification, of approval of the Constitution. They were selling the Constitution, trying to convince people to do it. So we have Hamilton, Washington, and John Adams on the Federalist side. They wanted a strong central government, thought the Articles of Confederation were bad times. They feared the common man making national decisions and did not think it was necessary to have a Bill of Rights. By contrast, on the other side, we have the Anti-Federalists. And this was the party of Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and Patrick Henry. They wanted a limited power to central government. They thought the Articles of Confederation were good times if they were tweaked just a bit. They did have faith in the common man to make decisions, and they absolutely mandated a Bill of Rights. They said it was necessary. So once we start this debate, we come up with a constitution, and then we have to convince people to ratify it. So the Federalists wrote what were known as the Federalist Papers, and these were a series of 85 essays describing the new government and why it was the way to go, why this was a really good option. The authors were John Jay, Alexander Hamilton, and James Madison, who coincidentally is known as the father of the Constitution. I love James Madison. He is an unsung hero. I don't know why we don't have statues of him everywhere, because this guy is like, he's good times. I love James Madison. And in my class, we're going to talk a lot about him because he is the father of the Constitution. He is why we are studying this right now. So these papers were written between 1787 and 1788. The significance of these papers is they successfully convinced people to ratify the Constitution, and it serves as a guide to the intent of the founders when courts interpret the meaning of the Constitution. So that's important. The Bill of Rights was also important. These were the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. Anti-Federalists would not ratify without it. So we should thank all Anti-Federalists for this. Amendments 1 through 9 dealt with basic individual rights, and then Amendment 10 deals with state rights. So this is where we get into this issue of sectionalism, which is basically states' rights versus federal authority. And this is a debate we still continue to have to this day. So this is very important. I want you to keep this in mind as we go forward. So the Constitution is complex. It advocates limited government. It is based on a federalist system, or federalism, where you have division of power between a national government and several state governments. Okay, the founders did not trust the common people generally to make intelligent decisions. They feared tyranny of the majority, and they believed that since all these people were uneducated and unprepared for the responsibilities of governing, they would make poor choices. So they set this up to limit the power of the government, but also check the power of the mob, power of the people. Again, as I said in the previous presentations, our founders were not fans of democracy. All right, so this is a breakdown of the Constitution. This may seem a little confusing, so let me walk you through this here. So you start out with the Constitution in the middle. And over here, you have federalism, which is our system of government. You have Federalists and Anti-Federalists. All right, now moving to the right, you see the Constitution has three branches. We have a legislative, executive, and a judiciary. All right, and then when you move again to the right, you have the separation of powers. These are the three key ideas, or the four key ideas here. Federalism, three branches, separation of powers, checks and balances. And then there are offshoots. So ideas about the separation of powers. Each branch has separate and distinct powers, and this is to prevent concentration of power. All right, as we move into checks and balances, each branch checks the powers of the others, and then each branch can overrule the others in some way. So you see that power is spread out. It's very difficult for power to be concentrated in one particular area, and this is what the founders wanted to achieve. It's ingenious. It really is incredible. And in the next unit, in Unit 2, we're going to go into deep discussion and deep detail of just how ingenious this system is. So to give you a breakdown of each of the branches, just very briefly, these are the three branches and some of their powers. The legislative makes laws, the executive enforces law, the judicial branch judges the laws. The legislative branch is a bicameral Congress, executive branch has a president, and the judicial branch has a Supreme Court. The Congress, or legislative branch, has the power of the purse, taxing and spending. The executive branch has the power of the sword. They fight, war, military, and the power of judicial review. With the judicial branch, they can declare laws unconstitutional. And we will learn later in the next unit the difference between intersecting and concurrent powers. We'll discuss the differences later, but you will see that some of these powers overlap as we move forward. And by the way, bicameral means two houses. In the legislative branch, we have a Senate and a House of Representatives, two houses of Congress. All right, so how it all works. So separation of powers allows for this thing called divided government. That means we can have Republicans in control of one branch and Democrats in control of the other. So this is a basic breakdown, right? So let's say, for example, Republicans control the legislative. You could have the Democrats controlling this one, and you could have, this is divided government, when one party controls one branch and another party controls the other. All right, and that's an important point to note. All right, so some examples. So a president nominates a justice. Senate does not confirm. Nominee can't take the court. They can't take the bench. Congress passes a law. President signs it, but the Supreme Court says it's unconstitutional, so they declare it null and void. The law is overturned. President sends troops into combat. Congress pulls funding, and troops have to come home. So these are just some examples of checks and balances that are built into our system of government. So some breakdown of key terms that I want you to understand. You don't necessarily have to memorize all of these things, but you need to recognize them when you see them and understand the significance, right? So Articles of Confederation, first form of government, confederal system, required cooperation of the states to function, and had a weak central government. The Constitutional Convention was called to correct the problems with the AFC, and it drafted a new structure based on federalism. Shays Rebellion was what prompted everybody to have a constitutional convention in the first place. I hope you remember this from American history, but in case you don't, there was a farmer in Massachusetts named Daniel Shays, and he was not getting paid his pension from serving in the Revolutionary War, and because he wasn't getting paid, he couldn't pay his mortgage, so the bank foreclosed on his farm. And this was happening across the country, where the government was not able to pay its debts. So Daniel Shays led a rebellion about against the government policies and the fact that people were taking his property. So this scared the founders and people of the states into coming together and saying, you know what, we got to figure out another way to handle this. The Great Compromise was the creation of a bicameral legislature and offered fair representation to both small and large states. So in the House of Representatives, it's based on population. So big states have more representation, right? But in the Senate, every state has equal. Each state gets each state gets 2 senators. So it's balanced. So this was the Great Compromise that we achieved with the Constitution. Okay, breakdown of key terms. I want to introduce this term to you now. We're going to read Federalist number 10 in Unit 2, and we're going to talk about that there. But I wanted to just introduce this concept to you now because it's so important, this idea of faction. All right. The typical book definition is as follows: a group of people who seek to influence public policy in ways contrary to the public good. That's all fine, well, and good, but you know what? It's really not specific enough, and it does not mirror Madison's definition. So this is my definition based off of Federalist 10. A group of people, either a minority or a majority, they have a singular goal. One, they are uniformly focused on this goal. They have tunnel vision, and it's usually, but not always, detrimental to the common good of society. The point of factions are that they don't care if it's detrimental. They're so focused on that one goal, they can't see past that goal. And so that's why I say it may be detrimental, because they don't really consider if it is or it isn't. All right, so the Federalists were Americans who supported ratification. Anti-Federalists were Americans who opposed ratification. The Federalist Papers were a series of essays that were written by the Federalists to convince Americans to ratify the Constitution and to also explain the Federalist system of government. Federalism is a system in which political authority is divided between a national government and several state governments. Checks and balances are the powers of the various branches should overlap to avoid a concentration of power. This is very, very important. Separation of powers, similar to checks and balances, seeks to avoid concentration of power, but it does it in a different way. The power to make, administer, and judge the laws is split among the 3 branches. We do have 3 branches of government. We have the legislative, executive, and the judiciary. The bureaucracy is the unofficial 4th branch, and we'll talk about this more in later units when we get into institutions of government. All right, so my suggested homework for you is to memorize the definition of faction. This is going to be increasingly important as we navigate the rest of the class, so it's important that you have this definition committed to memory. Students should always study their class notes because that is upon what tests are based. You should get a hard copy of the Constitution and have it with you every class. I don't know about other classes, but my students, we are going to be getting up close and personal with the Constitution. We're going to be getting all up in its business, so you need to have it readily accessible because we are going to spend great deals of time pontificating about the good and bad points of the Constitution. Another suggested piece of homework for you is to develop your own political ideology, or determine it at any rate. Or you should try writing a paragraph about which political ideology appeals to you and why. Give some examples, specific ones, of why you think you're a liberal, conservative, or libertarian. In my classes, we're going to have in-depth class discussions about what's a liberal, what's a conservative, what's a libertarian, and how you fit in to some of those, or none of those, or all of those, and we're going to have deep discussions about what that means. This is going to be very important as each of you come into your own as young adults and start to determine where you fit in the beautifulness that is the grand scheme of United States government. I hope this has been an informative discussion for you. I hope you understand the basic, big picture, key idea, foundational concepts of the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution, and I will see you next time.